this week's lesson, I think there's going to be more of an emphasis, and special emphasis, on personal family relationships that we, as we go through these two chapters, chapters 18 and 19. And Solomon continues with his Proverbs, beginning with chapter 18. A man who isolates himself seeks his own desire. Another translation is an unfriendly person pursues selfish ends and against all sound judgment starts quarrels. This self-seeking, self-centered, isolated man basically rages against all wise judgment, is what one translation puts it. What we see here is a very unpleasant personality, more often than not. Someone, I think we've met or dealt with people like this who have expressed some kind of exhibit an unwillingness to get along with others. If your translation says that this sort of person rages against other people, basically that's another way of saying he quarrels with other people. He's just got that quarrelsome. Not only is he a loner, he or she is a loner, or not very outgoing, but they are prone to starting quarrels, or it's easy to get into an argument with this person than you might imagine. So that's a warning about that kind of behavior and that kind of person. Verse 2 says, "Fools find no pleasure in understanding, but delight in erring or expressing their own opinions." I think we've known folks who basically just have to tell you, or it's easier than you can imagine, to get their opinion on any and everything, no matter how ill-informed it might be. It's interesting that what translates into erring or expressing their own opinions, the original Hebrew verb is found only in one other place in the Old Testament, and that's in Genesis chapter 9, verse 21, when it's describing what Noah did when he became a winemaker and a wine taster, liked this stuff a little bit too much, and wound up being essentially naked in his tent. Interesting. The drunken Noah basically exposes himself. And that's the same kind of verb that we see here. We're talking maybe a little too much information here. Yeah. Are you sharing a little bit too much? Do you really have to talk about that certain rash that you have that nobody wants to hear about? Again, one of the basic elements of the wise man, as Solomon has pointed out time and time again, is you measure your words. You are a man of relatively few words. You don't say everything that's on your mind. You guard your words before and you weigh them before you open and speak. Verse 3, when wickedness comes, so is contempt, and with shame comes reproach, especially on the person who originates that behavior. The words of the mouth are deep waters, but the fountain of wisdom is a rushing stream. Interesting. Even with those few words the wise person says, that there's enough wisdom and enough good thoughts, perceptive thoughts that compares to the rushing stream. It is not good to be partial to the wicked, and so deprive the innocent of justice. Again, the worst thing you can do, especially in society, is fail to deal with wickedness, fail to punish wickedness. In fact, in some cases, reward wickedness. And the punishment is reserved for people who are trying to do the right thing. Verse 6, the lips of fools bring them strife, and their mouths invite abuse. So that plays on what we just saw 2 verses ago, and the next verse is kind of builds on that. The mouths of fools are their undoing, or their destruction. Their lips are snared to their very lives, their souls. Keep on going. And here is a profound proverb, the words of a gossip. Another translation calls gossip a talebearer. Words of gossip are like choice morsels that go down into the inmost parts. This is the treachery and gossip. This is why it's so popular. You start down that trail, you start down that conversation. Human nature being what it is, you just have to hear more and more of it. And basically, whatever you hear, you can't unhear. And that's especially damaging, especially with the gossip, if the information that the gossip is telling you is untrue. Even if it is true, it's being built out in a way that's designed to damage the other person's reputation. That's the danger in managing gossip. That's why God does not like us to gossip. It can damage lives. It can even kill reputations because it shapes what people think of other people. And like we say, once you hear something, no matter whether it's true or not, you can't unhear it. Every time you see that person that's being talked about, you're going to hear, you're going to be reminded that what it was talking about. So gossip can harm relationships. It can destroy them. It can destroy reputations. So don't do it, God says. Foolish chatter can harm yourself and can harm others as well. That's the basic message of these last few verses. Going on to chapter 18, verse 9. And here we talk about this verse is one who is slack or lazy in his work is a brother to one who destroys. Laziness destroys work. It destroys whatever constructive work can be done. So many ways. A lazy person, a lazy man or woman, someone who just is thoroughly committed into the job as opposed to someone who really digs in and does an honest day's work. That person is slowing the work process down. Things are not getting done as efficiently or effectively as they otherwise might. That lazy person, if he's working at all, is very likely producing a lower quality, a more shoddy product because it's not built or it's not done as well. Obviously, they're wasting time and resources. And if nothing else, a lazy person more often than not allows things to fall into neglect. Basically, maybe it could be the equipment or the tools that they use. It could be a process that they're using and that everybody uses in the work. They're not paying attention to what they're doing. That process basically just starts falling apart. So laziness destroys. Verse 10, the name of the Lord, fortified tower, the righteous run to it, and are saved. This calls to mind the verse that we've seen in other places in the Bible, that whoever calls upon the name of the Lord shall be saved. Amen. In contrast, look at verse 11. The wealth of the rich is their fortified city. They imagine it a wall too high to scale. That's where the godless person, especially those who are extremely wealthy, and if you're a godless person, you don't have to be rich to be godless and put your trust in the wrong things. You can put your trust in other things that will inevitably let you down. Fail. But rich people, basically, more often than not, they take a look at all the wealth that they have, and they see that as their security. And of course, history has showed us how that kind of wealth can go away very quickly. Think of the Great Depression. Think of any kind of financial crisis where valuable assets basically are devalued very quickly. Verse 12. Before a downfall, the heart is haughty, but humility comes before a this kind of reminds us of a verse or a proverb that we saw not so long ago in chapter 16. Pride comes before destruction. On the other hand, opposed to pride is humility. Humility, and there's a synonym for that, meekness, kind of gets verse from the others, is the original Hebrew word that is translated into. In the other verses, the Hebrew word is indeed properly translated as bride. Here, the word here is matan, M-A-T-A-N, which then indeed translates gift. And so Solomon's advice here is not writing your way through life, but basically living a life of generosity and politeness. Here's an interesting verse 17. In a lawsuit, the first pleading's case seems right until the other side comes forward and cross-examines. Oh man, how many times have we leapt to judgment where we just hear one version of events, and then sooner or later the other side of the story comes out, or there's another side that emerges, and it's, I didn't know that. Gee, if I had known that, I would have responded differently. I would have come to a different decision. I would have done something differently. So this is a caution to be skeptical of whatever you hear about a controversial issue. If you think you're hearing one side, you need to pause any kind of decision making until you can investigate it and see if there is another side that you need to consider. There's nothing wrong with more information in a situation like that. Verse 18. Casting the lot settles disputes and keeps strong opponents apart. Casting the lot. This sounds today, in today's society, like, oh, well, let's just, let's deal some cards, roll some dice, whatever, just leave it to luck. No. Keep in mind the original culture of the time, the day and time. Good, faithful Jews who were casting the lot to settle a dispute basically were appealing to God. They had gone to the priest. The priest had these particular stones, especially the Urim and the Thummim. And the way those stones were rolled and cast were interpreted literally as a decision from God. So if you want to apply this to today, basically what Solomon is saying, appealing a situation to a strong outside authority that's respected by all sides, well, is your best way of keeping people apart, keeping people from just brawling and fighting their way. Okay, the stronger man wins because I beat the other guy to a pulp. No, there's a better way of doing it. In America here, that's usually through the court system. So that's the application that you might apply to today. We are in chapter 18, and we're about to pick up on verse 19, where a brother wronged or a brother who's offended is harder to win back. He is more unyielding than a fortified city. Such disputes are like the barred gates of a castle. Oh, gee. If you've ever encountered or even experienced a fallout within the family, you know how bitter that can be. And it doesn't have to be limited to relatives. It can be close friends. Any kind of strong, close friendship where one party has deeply offended the other, it's very difficult for those two to be reconciled. It may have something to do because they started out so close. The closer they are, the harder they fall. This is kind of the Humpty Dumpty rule. All the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty together again. So be careful in terms of how you deal with any long-term, close relationship, family or outside of family, because it's easier to offend someone and break up that relationship than it will ever be to put it back together. Yes. Selfishness,
pride basically can be great barriers to reconciliation. So that's a situation no one wants to personally encounter. From the fruit of his mouth, a man's stomach is filled. From the harvest of his lips, they're satisfied. Kind of talking up how your words are more than just words. They can help build the kind of life that is satisfying. It's the value of tactful, gracious speech. And the next verse kind of builds on that. The tongue has the power of life and death, and those who love it will eat its fruit. Whatever you say basically helps create the world that you live in. So think before you speak. And again, keep in mind that the kind of conversation that is tactful, that is gracious, that is God-fearing, and that avoids trying to hurt other people will ultimately yield dividends that are very satisfying. Verse 22, he who finds a wife finds a good thing and receives favor from the Lord. I think that would work on the other way. She who finds a husband finds a good thing. Verse 23, the poor man pleads for mercy, the rich answer harshly, even rudely. That goes back to the proud man, the wealthy man in verse 11, who puts his trust in his resources, his riches. Basically, they get a puffed up sense of themselves. So they really don't care how they treat other people. And that's just a principle that seems to be a part of human nature. Last verse in chapter 18 is one that we've heard before in many cases. One who has unreliable friends soon comes to ruin, but there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother. It's rare to have that kind of relationship because of the quality of it. But if you have a friend like that, if you've had a friend like that, you know what it's talking about. This is someone who will basically, if you're ever in an emergency and you need help, like in no other way or no other situation, you know you can count on that person. So if you have that kind of friendship, you have that kind of relationship, hang on to it. Now we come to chapter 19, which begins, better the poor man who walks in integrity and whose walk is blameless than a fool whose lips are perverse. And again, many times when Solomon talks about poor people, that's not a judgment on their lives. In fact, he makes the point that you can be poor and yet you can be a person of integrity. You're poor because of circumstances beyond your control, not because you have some kind of moral failure or because you're lazy. But you're better to be poor if you're walking the God-fearing life than to be a rich person who is rich because they're cutting corners. Verse 2, it's not good for a soul to be without knowledge, that is, to have no wisdom. Desire without knowledge is not good. And he sins who hastens with his feet. Talking about someone, and this is more often than not, typical behavior of a sinner. They rush toward sin because that's the kind of lifestyle that they found themselves in. That's the lifestyle they're comfortable in. They rush to it. It's not simply a matter of sin happening or coming their way. They look for it, they seek it, they run to it. A person's foolishness leads to his ruin, yet his heart frets against the Lord. Again, it's this sinful man, this sinful woman who basically chases after sinfulness. It's his doing, it's his fault, and yet when he experiences the results of sinful behavior, he blames God. And as a result, he has no peace with God because he's constantly angry and bitter with him. Next 4 verses talk about the advantages of wealth and privilege. And again, this is kind of Solomon is making an observation about life. Wealth, not necessarily good or evil in this situation. It's not a judgment on the person. It's just an observation about life in general. Wealth attracts many friends, but even the closest friend of the poor deserts him. We've actually seen this in the Bible. Think about the prodigal son. Prodigal son, for a time, after he took his inheritance, he was probably one of the most popular people in the region, because he was the guy who he spent his money basically throwing parties, hey, living the good life. He was living the good life until the money ran out. Oh, gee, tough. Well, it was nice knowing you. We'll see you down the road. Such is life. Luke 16 talks about the parable of the unjust steward. What does the unjust steward do? Well, he's fixing to get fired. In fact, he basically his boss thinks he has committed fraud. I don't want you handling my assets anymore. You're going to have to go out and find something else to do. What does the steward do? He cuts all these deals with people who owe the rich man money. Accounts receivable that have been hanging out there on the books for millions of years, maybe. Anyway, he settles accounts by basically cutting these deals. Hey, you're owing what, $10,000? Make it $4,000. We'll call it even, that kind of thing. And the rich man basically is just happy to have the money. And so before he gives the guy his walking papers, he commends him for what he's done. And this has always been an interesting verse for a lot of folks because, Jesus, what are you talking about? Well, the whole point that Jesus is making is use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourselves, to bless others, so that when your wealth is gone, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings. Use the wealth that you have. Use the wealth that God has allowed to come your way. Use it in a godly way. Use it in a fruitful and a practical manner that opens the doors to other people, especially opens the doors for others to learn more about God and about Christ. Continuing on, a false witness will not go unpunished, and whoever pours out lies will not go free. In our legal system, we have a little thing called a perjury. Anyone who has watched more than 2.5 Perry Mason episodes has probably picked up on this concept. If you lie in court, you go to jail. So there's that. There's also this thing between you and God. God knows what you're saying and doing. And if you keep doing it, if you don't repent of it, stop from doing it, God's going to take care of it. In fact, Jesus says in Matthew, he says that men will have to give account for every idle word in the day of judgment. That should be a sobering realization. Think before you speak. Verse 6, many curry the favor of the nobility of a ruler, and everyone is the friend of the one who gives gifts. Yeah, that's just a normal, that's such is life. People who are in charge, people who have power, people who have, in some cases, the power of life and death, you really don't want to go out of your way to offend them if you don't have to. Verse 7, the poor are shunned by all their relatives. They're hated. How much more do their friends avoid them? Though the poor pursue them with pleading, they are nowhere to be found. They are abandoned, even by their relatives. That's not, Solomon, again, is not saying that with any approval. He's saying it's such as life. It's part of human nature. We're attracted to wealth. We're attracted to people who have wealth and power and basically have all this leverage to do good things, especially for us, if we hit them upright. People who don't have the money, who don't have the social levity and so forth, not so much. Doesn't mean that God is saying you're excused from dealing or having any kind of relationship with these people. No, we need to reach out to these people because Solomon has already made clear that everybody, rich or poor, every person is created by God, and we need to deal with that person as a fellow creature from God. Verse 8, he who gets wisdom loves life. He loves his own soul. He loves himself, a good kind of love, a good kind of self-love. He who keeps and cherishes understanding that leads to wisdom, will soon prosper. A false witness will not go unpunished, and whoever pours out lies will perish. This is a repeat of verse 5. It's almost word for word, except that the last word is changed. The last word in verse 5, the person who pours out lies will not escape, he'll not go free. In verse 9, the person who pours out lies will perish. Interesting. Something to take note of. Also take note of the fact that in Revelation 21, verse 8, it tells us that liars will have their part in the second death. That's the lake of fire and brimstone. Verse 10, it's not fitting for a fool to live in luxury. And how much worse for a servant to rule over princes. I think we've all encountered folks who seem to be just the wrong fit for the wrong position, basically out of temperament, they're inexperienced, or they're folks who get a little taste of power and they are off to the races. They are probably some of the most arrogant people that you'll ever deal with, and very difficult to deal with. Verse 11, a man's wisdom, a man's discretion makes him slow to anger. It yields patience. It is to one's glory to overlook an offense, to overlook insults. Someone is obviously saying or doing something to get your goat, to get you angry. Don't take the bait, Solomon is saying. Let it rest. Just see where it's going and see long term. Play the long game, Solomon is saying. Don't respond to every provocation that comes your way. A king's wrath is like the roar of a lion, but his favor is like dew on the grass. That day and age, you didn't want to get the king angry at you. Unlike today, where you have all sorts of appellate processes where you can put off any kind of judgment for years, if not decades. Basically, if the king got mad at you Monday morning, good chance was by close of business that day, you were dead. That's how quickly things could happen. Think about the story of in Esther of the king and Haman. What happened to Haman very quickly? How his relationship with the king just turned on a dime. Conversely, his favor is like dew on the grass. In this very arid region, dew was a big thing because that was where a lot of your moisture came from. So dew on the grass, it was refreshing, it was life-giving, and very fleeting. Whatever dew was on the ground in early morning was evaporated by late morning. So if you incur the king's favor, don't wait around on it. Take advantage of it. Verse 13, a foolish child is a father's ruin, and a quarrelsome wife is like the constant dripping of a leaky roof. First time I've ever seen where a bad marriage was compared to a leaky roof. But maybe the comparison is apt. If you ever lived in any kind of a building or an office that had a leaky roof, you just kind of flinched every time it started raining because you know it was going to happen. Get the pans or the buckets up because you're going to have to collect that rainwater that works its way through the ceiling. It's just a constant annoyance. There's an Arab proverb that says that there are three things that make a house intolerable. Number one, a leaky roof. Number two, a nagging wife. Whoever wrote the proverb probably had this in mind, this particular proverb in mind. Oh, yes, he said there were three things. What was the third thing? Bugs. Call the exterminator. Hey. Verse 14. Houses and riches are inherited from fathers, but a prudent wife is from the Lord. That's an even greater gift. That's a follow-up to what Solomon was saying in just a few verses earlier. Laziness brings on deep sleep, and an idle person goes hungry. It's true, laziness leads to more laziness. Deep sleep, we're not talking about taking a cat nap here. We're talking about being totally out of it. I mean, you are sawing logs, and you're not even aware of how loud you're snoring. That's how bad it is. So just as being productive builds on itself, being lazy has the same effect in the opposite direction. Whoever keeps commandments keeps his soul, but he who shows contempt will die. Abandoning wisdom and living carelessly, living a life of carelessness away from wisdom, invites death. Whoever is kind to the poor leans to the Lord, and God will reward them for what they've done. Have you ever thought about the fact that, hey, if you help out a poor person, you're lending to God in God's eyes? What does God do when we lend to Him? Well, He always pays us back. He's never in debt to us, that's for sure. And one little wise saying that sticks in my mind is that you cannot ever outgive God. Whatever you give to God, He will give back and then some with interest. Discipline your children while there's hope. Don't be a willing party to their death. When you see a child act up, discipline them. Do it the right way so that there's a good lesson to be learned. When they're most receptive to that kind of discipline, where they can learn that kind of lesson. Because the time will come where if you wait and if you wait until they're practically full grown and you say, well, I really need to get around to taking care of that bad behavior, it's too late. That behavior has been baked into their personality. So deal with it when you see it in its earliest stages. And you don't want to be a willing party to their death. More often than not, people who have grown up without any kind of discipline wind up in a lifestyle that and many times can be fatal to them in one way or another. A man of great wealth, I'm sorry, I'm not reading my notes here correctly. A man of great wrath, a hot-tempered person, will suffer punishment. Rescue them, and you will have to do it again. And that's true. We probably are familiar with some folks who basically keep getting into the same situation over and over and over again. And if we've been tagged with taking care of them or getting them out of that situation, especially if it's a situation of their own making, it'll just happen time and time and time again. This is the result of someone who lives a life that is lacking in self-control, who does not learn from his or her mistakes, keeps doing the same old thing. Listen to advice, listen to wise counsel, and receive instruction. Accept discipline. And at the end, you'll be counted among the wise. Verse 21. This is a follow-up to some earlier verses in chapter 16. Many are the plans in a man's heart, but it is the Lord's purpose. It's His counsel that prevails. This is why James, in his letter, says, don't be making all these plans as though you are totally in charge, because you don't even know what's going to happen tomorrow. As it is, what you should do is, when you do make plans, you should say, if the Lord wills, we will do this and that. That's why you hear a lot of folks who say, Lord willing, we'll be doing this tomorrow, because we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, or if there will be a tomorrow. Verse 22, what a man desires is unfailing love. He desires kindness. Better to be poor than a liar. That's a follow-up to an earlier verse here. It points up again two key virtues that we need to pursue: kindness and truthfulness. The fear of the Lord leads to life. Then one rests content, untouched by trouble. Interesting little formula here. The fear of the Lord, we've read earlier, is the beginning of wisdom. What does it also result in? It leads to life. It leads to a prosperous, abundant life. Verse 24, Solomon tells another one of his little jokes here. He says, a sluggard buries his hand in the dish. He will not even bring it back to his mouth. He's painting a little picture here. So you have got to be lazy if you can't even feed yourself. If you even stop in the middle of dinner, and your hand's buried in the plate, and you can't even bring it back to feed yourself. That's pretty bad. Flog a mocker, and the simple will become wary. Rebuke the discerning, one who has understanding, and he will gain knowledge. Whoever mistreats his father and chases away his mother is the son who causes shame and disgrace. This verse 26, it's the exact opposite of one of Moses' 10 Commandments. This tells us, honor your father and mother. And Paul says that is the first of the commandments to carry promise, that it may go well with you. God looks at things like that. How do we treat our parents? How we treat our parents will be noted and regarded by God, and it will have an effect on our lives as well. Stop listening to instruction, my son, and you will stray from the words of knowledge. Funny thing about knowledge and about wisdom, it's not just a one-time thing. It's not something, hey, I'll go to this seminar, I'll become wise. Seminars help, but basically Solomon is saying wisdom is something you got to nurture. You got to feed throughout your life. You got to keep paying attention. And who should know better than Solomon? Because even Solomon, the wisest man on earth, strayed from the teachings of God. And we saw the very unhappy situations that resulted from that. A corrupt witness, someone who's disreputable, scorns justice, and the mouth of the wicked gulps down evil. They just don't know when to stop. Once they're on that roll, and I think we have seen people who behave like this, once they start talking trash, once they start doing bad things, they keep at it. They just can't stop. It's a slippery slope. And then our last verse for today. Penalties, judgments are prepared for scoffers, for mockers, and beatings for the backs of fools. Basically, punishment of if you refuse to live a life of wisdom, you'll pay for it. You'll suffer for it. You will be punished for it. Keep in mind the three mindsets that Solomon talks about. There's the open-minded person, one who is open to gaining and studying and understanding wisdom, embracing it. There's the empty mind. Yeah, there are a lot of empty minds going on around, even today. Those can go either way. Those are what Solomon also talked about, the simple-minded person. Simple-minded, not necessarily a bad thing. It may be someone who's just simply naive because they don't know better. But past a certain point, yeah, if you're simple-minded, that reflects on you, reflects badly on you. And then there's the closed-minded person, especially someone who's made up his mind, and in a lot of cases, to reject the teachings of God. And Solomon calls those people scoffers and mockers. Basically, their minds are so closed, they're calcified. There's just, you could drop an atom bomb on them, and there's no way you get them to open. They're still closed-minded at the end of the day. So, we've been studying Solomon's Proverbs for many weeks now, but next week we're going to wrap up our discussion, our examination of Solomon's Proverbs. If you will, please read chapters 20 through 22. That'll take you through the end of Solomon's Proverbs, and that'll be the basis of our lesson for next Sunday. So, if you will, please study that, and Lord willing, we'll be back here next Sunday, and I hope you will be too. Thanks for coming. I hope you got something out of the lesson today. Have a great week, and as we keep telling you, keep praying for rain, stay hydrated, and stay cool. And see you next Sunday.